In the remote town of Ravenshade, a peculiar illness begins to spread, leaving its victims eerily silent before they vanish without a trace. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a skeptical virologist, is sent to investigate the phenomenon, only to discover that this infection is far from natural. As she digs deeper, she realizes the disease is not only contagious, but malevolent, seeking to consume more than just the bodies of its victims. With the town spiraling into chaos, Eleanor must race against time to uncover the source before she too succumbs to the silent infection. The town had always been a quiet place, nestled between dark forests and fog-covered hills. It thrived on isolation, its people accustomed to their solitude. But something had changed. The air carried an unnatural stillness, and the usual sounds of daily life, the laughter of children, the chatter in the market, had dwindled into an eerie hush. The first signs of the infection were subtle. People speaking less, their voices growing hoarse. Then they stopped talking entirely, and finally, they disappeared. Dr. Eleanor Hayes arrived in Ravenshade with a logical mind and an unwavering belief in science. She had seen epidemics before, studied diseases that baffled others. But as she stepped into the abandoned streets, a sense of unease crept into her. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence, a force lurking within the town. She didn't know it yet, but she was already infected, not by the disease, but by the fear that had taken root in Ravenshade. The first signs Dr. Henry Calloway had been the town's physician for over 30 years. He had treated everything from the common cold to farming injuries, but he had never seen anything like this. His patients would come in, struggling to speak, their voices fading. Some described a feeling of pressure in their throats, as if something unseen was squeezing them from the inside. Others simply sat in silence, their eyes filled with terror. Eleanor reviewed his notes, expecting to find a rational explanation. Some sort of neurological disorder, a bacterial infection, or even environmental poisoning. But the symptoms defied categorization. Even more unsettling was the fact that no one had died. They had just vanished, their homes left untouched, their belongings exactly where they had left them. It was as if they had been swallowed by the silence itself. The vanishing cases. Eleanor spoke to the families of the missing, but their accounts only deepened the mystery. A woman named Margaret Foster had lost her husband and 2 children within days. "They just stopped talking," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then they were gone. I didn't hear a thing." Another man, George Holloway, described seeing his brother standing in their kitchen late at night, unmoving, his mouth slightly open as if trying to scream. When George blinked, his brother was gone. There was no sound, no struggle, no cries for help, only an empty space where he had been. The town's mayor, Richard Whitmore, was growing desperate. People were terrified, locking themselves inside their homes, whispering that something was lurking in the shadows. The infection was spreading, and no one knew how to stop it. The blackened tongues. Eleanor requested an exhumation of the few bodies that had been found. They had been buried quickly, their cause of death unknown. When she examined them, her stomach turned. The victims' tongues were blackened and shriveled, their throats lined with an unnatural darkness that seemed to extend into their chests. The tissue showed no signs of decay, yet it felt dry and brittle, as if drained of all moisture. She sent samples to a nearby laboratory, but deep down she knew science would fail her here. The infection wasn't bacterial, viral, or fungal. It was something else, something old, something hungry. The Forbidden Archives. Determined to find a historical precedent, Eleanor turned to the town's archives. The records went back centuries, documenting Ravenshade's foundation, its traditions, and its darkest moments. One entry, dated 1742, caught her eye. It spoke of the silence curse. According to the account, The town's founders had once practiced a ritual designed to appease an entity known only as the Hollow One. This being, it was said, thrived in silence, feeding on voices and erasing those who spoke too much of its existence. The ritual had been abandoned long ago, but had it truly been forgotten? Or had someone, revived it? The Whispering Shadows. As the nights grew longer, Eleanor began hearing whispers in the silence. At first, she dismissed them as tricks of the mind, remnants of exhaustion. But then she saw them, shadows moving where they shouldn't, stretching toward her like grasping hands. One night, as she lay in her rented room, she heard her own name whispered from the darkness. She turned on every light, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Something was watching. Something was waiting. The silent cult. Eleanor discovered an old journal belonging to a man named Elias Graves, a former priest who had warned of the ritual's power. He described a secretive group that had continued the practice in secret, believing that silence granted them eternal life. Their final entry read, "The Hollow One is patient. It will return when the town is ready." Was that what was happening now? Had someone completed the ritual? And if so, how could she stop it? The town's collapse panic engulfed Ravenshade. Entire families were found frozen in place, their mouths fused shut. The mayor disappeared, his office locked from the inside. The town's population dwindled by the hour. The infection, no, the curse, was claiming them all. Eleanor felt the weight of silence pressing against her. It was inside her now, clawing at her throat. She had to act before it was too late. The ritual's rebirth. With the help of a few survivors, Eleanor located the ritual site beneath the old church. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. Symbols carved into the walls pulsed with a dark energy. The Hollow One was here. The only way to fight silence was with sound. Eleanor and the others set off alarms, shattered windows, screamed at the top of their lungs. The shadows writhed, the darkness recoiling. But the entity was strong. It would take more than noise to banish it. The final confrontation. Eleanor remembered the journal. The Hollow One fears its own voice. Desperate, she played back the recordings she had taken during her investigation, amplifying the whispers until they became an unbearable roar. The entity shrieked. The town shook. And then, silence shattered. The cost of survival. The survivors emerged, gasping for breath. The curse was broken, for now. But Eleanor knew it was only a matter of time before the Hollow One found another way back. As she left Ravenshade, she tried to speak, to reassure herself that she was free. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. The infection had claimed her too. Silence is never empty. It waits. It listens. And one day, it will come for us all.